Gonna do a little watercolor scene. So I'm gonna switch cameras in a minute so you can see my paper and my palette and all those things. But before I do that, I just wanted to talk about just supplies. Um, we've already kind of talked about that you need, obviously you need your cards, your postcards or cards, and tape. You want to tape those down. The reason is with watercolor, you're adding water to your paper. And if you don't tape your paper down, it's very frustrating because paper bows up and then your watercolor can run in ways that you don't want it to. So the other thing is it'll create a nice border. So, and then a rigid surface to tape those to, and that could be your counter or anything. And then you have a palette and you have 2 colors of paint. Because we tried to really simplify the supply list. So we're gonna use just 2 colors. We have a blue and a green, and then you just have a mixing surface. My mixing surface is probably different than yours. You probably have a round palette, but whatever, even a white ceramic plate is totally fine for mixing. So if you find that you don't have enough space, you can always use something like that. And then you will need a pencil, an eraser, and then you have your brushes here. A 1/2 inch flat and then a round brush. And then the other ingredient we'll talk about is some salt. And it doesn't have to be anything special. It can just be just regular table salt is totally fine. Let's see. And I think, oh yes, so one of the most important parts that I wanted to say is that having 2 containers of water is important for this painting. The reason why you want 2 is because you're going to use one of the water containers to wash your brush, but then sometimes you're going to need clean water to put on your paper to create soft edges. So you really need 2 containers of water. So try to use one of them for washing your brushes, and then one of them keep that for clean water. And then paper towels or rags, whatever you have, you'll need some of that. Just dab off your brush and all of those things. Okay, so I think that is it. So I'm gonna switch my camera, and then we'll start talking about the process. So when I switch my camera, it always takes a minute. It's never immediate. Every time I do it, it doesn't work the first time. So just it might take me 2 or 3 minutes to get it right, and I will see you soon. So I'm just going to mute myself right now.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's it.
And Marilyn, before you logged on, Leslie instructed everyone to tape down their card to a surface. So kind of like this. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I put the supplies someplace very special and now I can't find them. Isn't that great? Yeah, I'm looking. I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So we are going to do a little practicing before we jump into that. But let's pull this out. This is what we're gonna go for. So you don't have to be stuck to this, married to it. You can use your own, inspiration. But we're gonna have to build in layers, and we're gonna have drying time in between. Because with watercolor, you're adding water to the paint, and sometimes you're wetting the paper, but before you go to the next part, you have to let your paper dry completely before you paint on top of it. So for example, the snow, you can see, has a little bit of like light blue shadow here and then here. So I'd have to paint that first, let it dry completely, and then paint the tree on top of it. If I don't let the paper dry completely, when I paint the tree isn't gonna be, it's gonna be all mushy, basically. So watercolor requires some patience and some planning. So this is kind of what we're working with. I have this drawn out very lightly, and you can't see it. I know you can't see it. So this is what I'm going, this is the drawing that you can kind of work with. But the reason why you can barely see this is because when you draw for watercolor, you really want to keep your line very light. So let me just lift this up so you can kind of see.
I can see it.
See, it's very, very, very light. Because you're using a transparent medium, if you have really dark lines, you're gonna see those lines through. So when I draw for watercolor, I draw as light as possible, and I'll even go over with an eraser and erase a little bit before I paint. So what you could do now, and I did this with just a regular number 2 pencil. I did this, the very light line. This I used a heavier pencil so you could see it. So these are just the starting shapes to draw. So, you have one little hill, another hill, and then you have mountain, and then another kind of mountain. So those are going to be the shapes. So you can go ahead and draw those on both of your pieces of paper. And you obviously can change this as much as you want. So I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to do this drawing. And if you want, I don't see all of you, but I see some of you, you could just give me a thumbs up when you are done with that drawing part. And just remember, keep your lines very, very light.
Okay. I can't tell. I'll put it on your channel. I can't tell. Can't read it.
It's a big white sticker. Got a big white sticker on it?
Nope. I'm just gonna put it on your
That's the
table.
old one.
Repair.
Okay, I see one thumbs up. Okay, thank you. And I don't really see everyone, Talia. I don't know if you do. So if you can, I don't know, I'll give you about 2 more minutes, I think. You could even let me know if you see people still working or what.
Looks like I see some people still working.
Okay, I'll give you 2 more minutes. The other thing I forgot to mention, because of the drying time with watercolor, if you have a hair dryer, that actually could help you speed up the drying time. At some point tonight during this demo, I might mute myself and pull out my hair dryer, just so I can speed up the drying time and get through to the next part. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead to the next part. So what I'm going to do is we're going to practice some things on a scrap piece of paper. So I hope you all have one scrap piece of paper, one extra watercolor paper that we're going to use for practice. So what the first thing that I want to practice is this technique with the shadows on the snow. Let's see, what was the message? The shadows on the snow. So the one thing with watercolor is that with watercolor, you preserve the white of the paper for white areas. So we don't have white paint for snow. So you can see this is a snowy hill. What makes it look like a snowy hill is this blue-gray shadow behind here. Same with this. This white snowy hill is just the white of the paper, but it really looks like a shadow because, or I mean a hill because of the shadow that is on the hill behind it. So what I want to practice here is getting this hard edge right here where you have white against this blue, and then you can see it softens as you go up. So that's the first thing we're going to practice, and then we'll paint our snow on both of the papers. So we're going to just kind of take it piece by piece. Okay, so this is just the practice, and you could do this along with me. So I'm just really lightly going to draw a hill shape here. And I know you guys can't see it because I need to keep it really light, but it's there. So I'm going to use my blue and I just squeezed some out. With watercolor, you barely use any paint. So this, we're going to add a lot of water to this. So I'm just going to use my round brush here, and I'm putting some water in my palette. So that's just clean water. And I'm going to pull just a tiny bit, just touching the tip of my brush in that paint and mixing it into that water. So I think this is going to probably be too dark. I'm going to just test it. This is my scratch piece of paper. I think it's probably going to be a little dark. So what I need to do is just add more water to it. So I'm going to add a couple brushfuls of water. So adding water to the paint is really going to make it more transparent and lighter in value. So now I tested it, and that looks pretty good for a shadow color right here. So it's quite watery. Okay, so what I want to do is I want a hard edge at the top of this hill, and I want water here. And I'm going to put water here so it softens. So I have this paint, but before I put the paint on, sorry, my brush is wanting to roll around. I'm going to take my 1/2-inch flat brush with clean water, and I'm putting an area of clean water up above, but not down to the line. The line is right here, and my water edge is here. So I'm I'm putting this area of water. And while that's still wet, I'm just gonna quickly go in and add the paint at the edge of that heel and then pull it up and let it overlap into that wet area.
You froze momentarily your screen. So how far up? So you wet above the line up a few inches?
Yeah, well, not, so I wet just, I wet like a 1/4 inch above, but then I wet a kind of a large area like this here.
Wait, what?
So I'm gonna do that again. I'll do it again. I know it's hard because you can't see the water.
Well, no, you froze while you were doing it. So,
Okay, yeah.
so the screen froze, so we couldn't see you do it.
Okay, yes, okay. So, I'll just do it here. Here's the heel. And I'm just gonna take my wet brush. And I'm going about a quarter inch above that area and then, but making a larger wet area. So you can see where my brush is going, way up there. And then I have to work kind of quickly while that's wet. I'm gonna take my paint along the edge of that hill and then let it overlap into that wet area. So what happens is that water on my paper just creates a really soft shift where the blue just kind of fades out. So, but I have, I didn't pull the water down here, so I have a hard edge here, but a soft edge there. So the fancy term for this is called negative painting because I'm not painting this white snowy hill. I'm actually painting behind it or around it. That's where the shadow is coming in. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that. You're gonna see it multiple times on my paintings here. I'm gonna set this aside now. And I have two to work on. So if you want to, you could watch me do the first one and then you could paint along at the second one or whatever you want to do. So right now, all I'm gonna start with is the shadows behind the snowy hills. And I'm just gonna use the same color that I have mixed. So there's a shadow right here. I have a hill right here. And just so you know, it's this right here. So I'm wetting about a 1/4 inch away from that line. And I'm wetting I have an inch strip of water there. And then I'm taking the paint going along the edge of my line and pulling it up towards that water and letting the water just kind of move my paint. One important thing is you want like a buffer of water to soften your color. If you take the color too far to the edge of the water, it's not going to soften it. You're going to end up with a line. So the other thing that you can kind of watch for, sometimes you have watercolor puddling along the tape edge. So I just take a paper towel and just kind of go along that tape edge and just pick that up. Okay, so now I have one of those done. Now I'm going to add a shadow here. And I'm going to be, when I do this, I want to be really careful that I don't touch this edge right here because it's wet. I don't want to touch it because it'll bleed together. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna start about a 1/4 inch above. So I'm not over this direction, I'm not putting very much water. But this direction, I'm gonna put a large area of water here. And then again, I'm gonna go take this color and go along the edge and let it overlap into that wet area. And then I'm gonna add a little bit more shadow up here. So I'm just picking up a little bit more of that color and pulling it up, but I want to make sure I don't get too close to the, oops, my camera freezes sometimes, so let's see. Okay. So this is just like a little bit of a bigger shadow on the snow there. And I stopped with the paint down here before I got to that wet edge, so I created a nice soft edge. So the last shadow on the snow is I'm just gonna put a really pale shadow right here. It's not gonna be behind a hill, but I just want to put a little shadow. So I'm just gonna take my wet brush and I'm just gonna wet this area here. So I just like this, if you can see where my brush is, I'm just wetting down to the bottom. And then I'm just gonna dip my brush into that blue and just add a little color, but I'm not gonna get too close to the edge of that water because I want it to just be really soft. And then that's it for the shadows on the snow. But before I move on to the next one, I want to put in the sky color because we have to do this in stages. And so it will dry so we can get to the next stage. So let's see, I'm gonna actually wait. I want to wait till you guys are all, like, I think I'll give you 2 more minutes to kind of finish what you're doing, and then in 2 minutes I'll start the sky, just so you guys can watch me do that. Okay, so I'm gonna just start with the sky here. One thing on this, you see that it has little speckles in it. That's where I use the salt. So with salt, what happens is you put the watercolor down, and while it's still very wet, very liquid, you just take a pinch of salt and you sprinkle it on. and the salt will absorb the liquid that's under it. So it basically will make holes in the color. So that's sort of how I got that speckled effect. One thing to think about, kind of what I said earlier about the snowy hills, the reason they appear white is because you've preserved the white of the paper. So we're gonna leave the mountain white, but paint the sky around it, and it'll make the mountain pop out. But the other thing here is, when I paint the sky, I'm gonna slightly ignore. I'm going to paint the sky around here, but I'm going to put a little water down here and just let the sky fade out down through this mountain. Because when we paint the mountain over it, it gets complicated if you're trying to match the exact line. So I'll show you how I'm doing that. Okay, so I want the sky to be a bit darker at the top than the shadow color. So I'm gonna leave some of that shadow color so I can do the other one. So I'm gonna make a puddle that has more paint in it in another location. So I'm gonna add, you can add water later or add water before. I just added a couple brushfuls. Oop, I see my camera has frozen. Okay. I added a couple brushfuls of water here, and then I'm just picking up a little paint. Just with that fresh paint, just add a little bit and then see where you are. So I have to just test and see if it is going to be too dark. So one thing about watercolor is it dries lighter than what it will look like when it's wet. And it's about 25% lighter. So when you're mixing a color, mix it slightly darker than you want it to dry. So I added more pigment to this puddle right here. And then I'm going to test the color. It's a bit darker. I think I'm gonna add just a tiny bit more. You don't want it too dark, but okay. And you want to have enough paint. You don't want to run out of paint here. So just make sure you mix a big enough puddle so you can paint that sky. So when you paint the sky, as soon as you're finished, you need to be ready to pick up your salt and sprinkle that in. So have your salt ready because the salt works when you sprinkle it into wet watercolor. Okay, so I think I know this is a little confusing, but I'm only going to add water to my paper right here where this mountain is, because I want this color to fade out right here. But so only in this spot, I'm adding water. So you'll see how that will work. Okay, so I'm just gonna do this quickly because ideally when you're doing a larger area watercolor, you want to get it down as quickly as possible. So that it'll dry without brush marks. So I'm just carefully painting around this mountain shape, filling in very quickly. Oops. And then when I come over here, I'm gonna let this paint overlap into that wet area. And it's just gonna fade out. And that's what I want it to happen there. It's gonna be a soft edge right there. So very, very quickly, what I need to do is sprinkle in the salt. So I'm just taking a pinch full of salt and just sprinkling it in. Okay, so, now I can't do anything over here on this painting until it's completely dry. So I'm gonna move to my other painting and I'm just gonna start, painting the snowy hills. And then I'll paint the sky. So I still have, and I'm gonna use the same method that I used. I still have this blue that I used, for the, shadows here on the snow. So I'm gonna use that same method where I'm putting a little water just about a 1/4 inch above that line to create a soft edge. And then while that's wet, I'm just gonna take the paint and go exactly on that line and then just overlap that paint into that wet area and it'll create a nice soft edge. And then sometimes when I have this puddling over here on the tape edge, I'll just use my paper towel and kind of dab it up a little bit. So now I'll go to the next one. And I need to be careful that I don't touch this one up here because it's still wet. Okay, so I wet that area. Now I wet it about a quarter inch above the line, and now I'm taking the paint directly to that line. And letting it overlap that wet area, and then I'm just gonna pull this shadow up a little bit, making sure I don't go too close to the edge of that water and just let it soften. And then I'm just gonna put a really pale shadow right here. So I'm going to add water to my paper right here. So this little corner, this is just clean water. You can see the what the salt does. It'll kind of do something slightly different based on how wet your paint is, but it absorbs the watercolor. Over here, my paint was a little bit more dry, so it's making smaller speckles. Over here, the paint was more watery, and so it created like a big snowflake. It's always like you never know exactly what's going to happen with the salt. So I'm gonna paint this sky next, but I need to mix more of that slightly darker color because I don't think I have quite enough. So I'm just adding more paint. I just dipped my brush in a little bit of that paint, but I know that's gonna be too dark, so I know I need to add more water now. And then I can also test that on a scrap piece of paper. And it looks like I got too much water. That's very easy to do. So I'm gonna add a bit more paint. And I think this is a little bit more like I want because it's gonna dry lighter. And it's fine if it looks a little bit more like a night sky too. And then I'm gonna I'm gonna paint the sky the same way where I'm just gonna I'm gonna put water only right here over this top of this mountain here. And then just gonna start in with my sky, and I got a little darker on this color, and that's okay. It'll be a night sky. I'm trying to do this fairly quickly because I want the paint to be wet at the same time. If it's so it dries without brush marks. So I'm trying to keep this wet edge of color, which is kind of tricky to do. And then just pulling it down and letting it overlap into that wet area to create a nice soft edge. Oh, and then I need to quickly, oops, shouldn't have done that. I had this drying evenly. So I need to quickly sprinkle in some salt. So that's kind of interesting because this is going to be more of a night sky and this is a little bit lighter, which is kind of fun. So I'm gonna kind of pause so you guys have a chance to catch up. So I think I'll pause for, I don't know, like 5 minutes, but I am happy to answer any questions that you might have. So if you have any questions, go ahead and you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask me. Okay. So before we move on to trees, there's one last thing we're gonna paint up here, which is this sort of mountain here. Now, I'm simplifying this from my example. The way I painted this one is I painted it as if it was like a forest in the distance. So you can see I had put that like the little edge of the trees. You could do that. It is more difficult to do. It takes longer. So I'm just going to simplify this and make it more of a simple mountain in the back. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of shadows on the white of the mountain here. And then we'll let it dry, and then we'll move on to the trees and we'll practice trees while it's drying. So there's this mountain here, and I'm gonna let it fade out down here because, as you can see, there's gonna be a row of green trees in front of it. And it's best if it kind of fades out to a soft edge right here. And so you can do this if your sky is dry. I know not everyone has hair dryers, but it's really important to do this when this is dry. I waited long enough and I have a hair dryer, so I can go ahead and do this. So I'm going to this mountain here. I don't want it to get it too dark, but I want it to be slightly darker in value than the sky. So what I can do is that this is my leftover, oops, I can see I froze. Okay, I have this leftover paint that I used in the sky here. So I can make it just notch it a tiny bit darker. And I could just do that by just pulling a little bit more pigment in. And let me just test it here. Might be a slightly dark, too dark. I'm just gonna add a tiny bit more water to that. So I'm gonna just use that to put in this mountain here, but I want it to fade out right here. So I'm just gonna use that water trick. I'm just putting water here where I want it to fade out. And then I'm just gonna overlap this area of the sky. And I'm not too worried about getting any specific shape. And I'm going to just pull that paint towards that wet area. And I'm going to take this all the way down to the top of that hill there. It's puddling a little bit, so I'm going to take my clean damp brush and just try to soften that, pick up a little bit of that paint. Got slightly blobby right here. So I'm just taking my clean damp brush. I just want to soften that little edge there, and I'm just doing it with this clean damp brush. I don't want to fiddle with it too much. That is probably going to get covered by these trees here. So I don't want to mess with it too much. It didn't work out exactly as I wanted. I think I had too much water down there, but I think I would make it a bigger mess if I kind of try to fix it. So I'm going to just leave it alone and let it dry. And then I will have some trees that go up into that. So I'll try to add, when I do it on the next one, going to try to be more careful about not having quite as much water. So again, I'm putting just water where I want it to soften out. And then just painting my mountain here and pulling it down to that water area. And then going right to the top of that hill. So I'm just gonna take my damp brush and just add a little bit more water right there. Okay, so I'm just gonna leave it like that and let it dry completely. So, now I'm just gonna add a little bit of shadow on the mountain, and you can add the shadows however you want. You could add hard edged shadows, or you could add softer edge shadows. I'm gonna go back to this lighter value. I still have that. It has more water in it, so it's more transparent. And this time, I'm not gonna wet that mountain. If I wanna soften an edge, I can go very carefully with my damp brush along the edge of that. So this time I'm taking this, just gonna put in a shadow here. If I wanna soften some of these edges, I can go in, wet this brush, dab it off on a paper towel so it's just damp. And I can just take that brush and just like tickle the edge of that and just soften that edge a little bit. Do it here and there. So I'm kind of dragging a little bit with that brush just to create a bit more shadows. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to get too crazy with the shadows there. And then I'm going to go over and do it to this one. And I'm going to do the same thing where I am wetting this brush and, sorry about that, dabbing it off on the paper towel so it's not super wet, but it's just damp. And I'm just going along the edge occasionally and just softening that edge a little bit. Same thing with this one. And I can just kind of drag a little bit of paint around. I have more mountain on this one just because of my drawing is slightly different. So I'm gonna add a little bit extra shadow there. And I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to overdo it. But you can see just a little bit of shadow then creates a bit more dimension. Okay. So, now I'm going to set this aside and I want to practice some trees. Um, it looks like, let's see, does everyone need, maybe I'll give you like 2 more minutes to just finish this last part, and then I will move on and we'll practice trees. Okay, so now we're gonna practice trees, and I'm actually gonna move this because I don't want to lay anything on top of it because it might be slightly damp. But with the green trees, I have a row in the back here, behind this hill. So it's almost as if there is another forested hill behind the snowy hill. We're seeing the tops of the trees, right? One thing to notice with this row of trees here is that they're connected. They're a dark green value, and the bottom of them is all connected. So it creates this dark line here. The other thing to notice about these is that to make trees look natural, you want variety. So you want a variety of heights. So you can see the trees, some are taller, some are medium, some are smaller, goes up and down. So that's the other thing you want to think about. And then you want you don't want them to be spaced equally. You know, the only time you see trees that are spaced equally is if they were planted, right? But nature doesn't do that. So you want something to look a little bit more natural. So variety of sizes, that means the tall and short, and then you want them to be some to be further apart, some to be closer together. But just notice how these are connected. So these are further back in the background, so they're smaller, and then these are in not exactly the foreground, but more the middle ground. So these are taller, so they're larger. So that's what we're going to do with the trees, but we're going to practice painting trees first. So you'll just need your scratch piece of paper. There's different ways to paint trees, but I'm going to just show you my method here. We're also going to all have slightly different colors. I have this sap green, which is a little bit lighter than I want it to be, but that's okay because I have this really dark blue. So all I'm going to do to make this green a little darker is I'm just going to add a tiny bit of that dark blue. And now I have a darker green here. So I'm gonna ask you to kind of just practice trees, but this is my approach, what I usually do. If you have one of these round brushes, if you kind of have this puddle of paint and you twirl the paint, you get a nice sharp point. If you hold your brush vertically and you barely touch the tip and drag on your paper, you can make a pretty thin line like that. So thin line. So that is the start for my trunk. So that's what I do is I make a line and then I build off of each side of that line for my tree. And I'm just pushing down and lifting up with my brush. So there's different shapes of trees. This tree has like the limbs are kind of going upward. You know, there's some trees where, just gonna start again with that centerpiece. The limbs are going a little bit more down like this. So whatever shape of tree you want to make, just practice it a little bit. See what feels natural to you. You want some holes, but you want to avoid super thin tree. You want a little bit more bulk. So the other thing about well, some trees look like that, but sorry, you want to I'm pushing down on my paintbrush, so I'm making kind of larger marks here. I want to leave some of those holes, but I don't want it to be too scrawny, basically. So in this, I have a variety of sizes of trees. but they're all connected. So now we'll kind of practice that. To keep them, to paint a row of trees like that that are all connected, you basically want to start at one side and continue going in one direction until you finish the other side. The one other thing that makes this row of trees interesting is I have some areas are more green and some are darker. So I have this dark puddle of paint right here. I think what I'm gonna do to make a darker green is I'm just gonna add more green to that and more blue. I don't want it to get too dark yet. The trees in the front will be darker. Okay, so I'm gonna just try to create on this a row of trees here. And let me just, I'm gonna give you a dark line. That's too dark. That's not what I would normally do for watercolor, but just so you can see what I'm trying to do here. And this is just the practice one. So I'm just starting with the trunk. And I want these to be connected at the bottom, and I want them to be different heights. So you can see I'm moving this way. I can pick up the slightly darker value, trying to make them different heights. And I'm connecting them at the bottom here. And maybe I'll make a really short one. Connecting them at the bottom. And with the trees, even though you're going, you're kind of going down a hill, you want to make sure your trees are staying vertical. You don't want your trees to start slanting with the hill. So you can see I'm connecting these at the bottom. Okay, so that's kind of the feeling that we want to get. And I'm moving in this direction because this over here is going to start drying. But if I keep this wet paint moving, I'm gonna dry. They're gonna dry without any paintbrush lines. They're kind of gonna be one connected shape. This direction. Okay, so now I think that we want to put this into practice. The one thing I will say is that your paper really needs to be dry to get these nice crisp edges here on your on the trees. So just make sure your paper is dry before you put in that row of trees. Okay. So now going back, so this, these are taped side by side and I'm right-handed. So I'm going to try to be strategic here. I think I should do this one first. Because if I do that one first, by the time I'm painting this, I know I'll inevitably lean my hand on that. So I'm going to paint this one first so that I can move this way. Because if I lean my hand on wet paint, then I can smear it and all of those things. So, and remember, you're just trying to keep that variety of sizes, heights, shapes. And this is back in the distance, so I need to keep them, you know, somewhat small. So I'm going to start over here. Doing the same thing, starting with that trunk. Some of them are going to be smaller than others. If you find that your marks are gloppy, it could be that you might have too much paint on your brush. So that happens to me sometimes. So if you do like, see, I'm mixing my paint in this puddle. Sometimes I'll pull my brush off the edge and I'll just kind of swipe it. And so if there's excess paint in my brush, it will, I'll kind of get it off. It will help the kind of splotchiness sometimes. So let me just show you sometimes what happens. I got really blobby right here. See this? But that's okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make another tree that's really close to that one, but maybe a little taller. And then those blobs that I just created will make it look like it's just part of another tree. So remember to think about variety. Put in some short ones here, some minis, maybe a couple. Remember to vary the height and spacing. So this, what I'm deciding right here is I'm gonna have this forested end soon, but it's gonna go behind both of these. Instead of keep going down this hill, I'm going this direction. You can see that. And I'm just gonna add a couple more trees here. I think maybe one more mini one. Okay, so I'm just gonna continue on this one. Just remember to kind of try to create variety. Couple more trees here. Okay. So I know you guys are still working. While you're doing that, I'm gonna mute myself and then I'll use the hair dryer. We only have 10 minutes left, but I'm fine with going over a little bit. But I don't want to keep you too long, but we're actually very close to the end. So I'm just gonna mute myself and I'll use the hair dryer. So let's see, I'm guessing that, do you all need about about 2 more minutes to finish the tree there? Okay. I'm gonna give you 2 more minutes, and then we just have a couple other things to finish up on this painting. Okay, so the last couple things to finish up here is that I have this group of, oops, I can see I'm frozen. Okay. The last thing is I have this group of trees right here that are kind of peeking behind this hill here. So these are bigger because they're closer to us. And the other thing is you're going to want to use a darker value than like this is a green. I know you guys can't see it. It looks darker on the video, but it's a little lighter than what it looks like on my screen. I'm going to make this color that I'm going to use for these trees darker. And then the very last thing that I did that we can do after that is I put little tracks, snow tracks. So we can do all of that just to finish this up. So I need to make a darker green. This is the darkest green that I have right here. So I'm actually going to just add blue to it. Here, I'm going to add just a tiny bit more water because I want it a little bit watery, but I want it dark. And so I'm just going to test that color on my scrap of paper. It's pretty dark. I think I need to add a little bit more green. It looks more blue. I want it to be slightly greenish. I think that will work pretty well. You can, I think you can see, maybe you can't see, but it is darker than that one. Okay. And this is, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna go do this one and do that one so I don't drag my hand through the wet paint. And I'm just really starting this the same way and you don't want this to get too close to the trees you just painted because if those trees are still wet, they're gonna smudge and smear together and you want to avoid that. So mine is far enough away where that's not going to be an issue. You can see this is darker value and bigger tree. And then I'm gonna have another one here. I'm connecting these here at the bottom. And then I'm just gonna put one more right here. And I'm gonna let this one go off the edge, the parts of it go off the edge of the paper here. Might need to mix a little bit more paint to do the others. And then one more. Okay, so I think I'm gonna give everyone like 2 minutes to finish, and then there's just like the little bits of finishing touches.
No, if you don't take the time. I hope I'm not the only one that has ponderosa pines. Those
That's
first.
that's totally fine. That's why I kind of showed you the different, I mean,
Yeah.
your trees can be whatever you want them to be.
I wanted them to look like yours, but they're more gloppy, but I just need
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah, the trees really do take a lot of practice to kind of it's almost like you get a rhythm down and practice mark what kind of marks you can make with your brush, you know. Yeah. And every artist makes trees slightly differently. It's funny because sometimes you can look at a painting and almost know who it is based on how they're using their brush marks, with their trees or whatever.
Right.
Okay, so the little final thing that I did on this painting was just like little rabbit tracks. And I I looked up what rabbit tracks look like, so I don't know if they're exact, but like they have the two little front paws kind of side by side and then two back paws kind of behind. And so this hill here is closer to us, so the tracks would be bigger on this, and then here they're going further away, so they get really, really tiny. So you also need a very, very light blue. I still have some of this shadow color left, so I've just put a little more water in it. So I'm just gonna test that color. And I think that'll actually work pretty well for me. So I think I'm going to use that. I don't want them to get too blobby. So I'm going to, so my brush is really full of paint here. So I'm actually going to kind of pull that brush up on the edge of my palette and just knock that, it's like a drip. I'm just knocking the excess paint out so that I have kind of a nice tip. And I'm going to start on this one. Um, this appears kind of uh, darker than it's going to dry. It's going to dry lighter because um, it's transparent, but the paint's kind of blobbed. So I have like these, they're almost puddles of paint here. If it's too puddled, what I can do is dab the tip of my brush off on my paper towel so I can reduce the water in there, and I can pick it back, put it back in that puddle, and it works as a straw. You can see I'm using it to just, I don't know if you can see that. I'm soaking up the excess puddle of paint. Okay, so when the rabbit tracks go back here, so they're gonna go down a hill and then start back up here. I probably want them to be slightly lighter in value. So I'm gonna pull some of this paint maybe aside and add a little bit more water to that. And I want them to be really tiny. So I really need to make very, very small marks. So I'm just barely touching the tip of my brush. And now I'm gonna do it on, excuse me, the next one. And then the last one's here. So the salt, you really want to leave that on until you are sure that your paint is completely dry. Which the sky probably is dry. Once and in fact, make sure leave your paper tape down until it's completely dry. And then, carefully peel off the tape and you'll have a nice border. And then what you can do is just take it over to like a trash can and just brush the salt off. Don't worry if the salt does not completely disappear, because sometimes a salt residue just remains on there. And let's see, Talia, should the students send photos of, or I don't know if they should hold them up or
I think it would be fun if people held them up, if
Okay.
everyone's okay with that.
yeah.
And they're welcome to send photos. We would love some photos to be able to
Okay.
share too.
So I'm gonna switch my my screen here. And so I'm gonna remove the spotlight.